My name is Maryam Al-Madea. I wasn't born with this name, but I chose it when I converted to Islam, in 1992. My Christian birth name is Maria, Mary in English and Maryam in Arabic. I would like to share with you my personal story of conversion to Islam, with the hope that this story can bring about a better understanding of Islam. My story is organized into different periods of life. Growing up as a Christian, early years, moving away, adolescence, searching for the truth, my 20s, opening up, my 30s, returning home, my 40s and forever, growing up as a Christian. Early years I grew up in a family with a Catholic tradition. I went to Catholic primary school, learned my Catholicism, received my first communion, my Catholic name, in honor of a saint, made confession, all the important steps in growing up Catholic. I tried my best to be good and I was very afraid of some terrible punishment from God if I wasn't. Over those years I developed a considerable sense of guilt. For what, I wasn't sure, but I knew I was guilty of something. The nuns who taught me seemed harsh and I couldn't understand why these brides of Christ were so tense and angry. In the summers I would travel south to visit my mother's family. My grandfather was a Baptist minister for a time and my mother grew up in the Baptist tradition. As my father was Catholic, she had to convert to Catholicism in order to marry him. So when I went south, I would go to church and Bible school and sing Christian songs around an old organ. My aunt would play and my cousin and I would sing with great feeling. Those were good times and that part of my Christian upbringing was the most enjoyable and comfortable. And the years went by. I spent the school year at home and the summers in the South. My religious life was a double life. Looking back, it seems that the only thing the Catholic and Baptist traditions had in common was a foundation in Jesus, peace be upon him. Apart from that, they were two different worlds for me. Withdrawal. Adolescence. I didn't have an easy childhood and family problems increased in severity to the point where, one day, I came to the conclusion that there was no God, or, at least, if there was a God, he wasn't on my side. I remember that day, lying in my bed at night, waking up to that reality. Suddenly I felt a great vacuum inside myself, but I told myself that if that was the reality, I had to accept it. At my level of understanding, that was my reality. As my teenage years progressed, I started researching. By this time, I was no longer required to go to church. In our family, religious practice ceased around this time, and I decided to search for the truth myself. I remember reading about Jesus, peace be upon him. I had a very strong feeling about him and even felt connected to him in some way. But I could never accept the way he died. How could someone so special and close to God die like that? It seemed like an unspeakable tragedy. And so I developed my own opinion and belief that Jesus was in fact a real person who lived on this earth, very special with a very special mission, but beyond that, I didn't know. In the end I gave up the idea of Christianity completely, because so many things didn't make sense. Search for the truth. My 20s. When I entered my 20s, I felt an enormous need to find the truth, to calm the restlessness in my heart and soul. I was introduced to Buddhism and as it seemed close to what I was looking for, at least there was a clear logic, I joined. In many ways it helped me feel better, but for me something seemed to be missing, which I didn't know at the time. Over the years I drifted away from Buddhism too. It was becoming more of a burden than a comfort in my life. During this time I traveled to Egypt on business, where I met my husband, who grew up in the Muslim tradition. I was still involved in Buddhism and tried to convert him. He listened patiently and I believed I was succeeding, but I know now that he would never have converted. The opening, my 30s. Then I continued, becoming more and more uncomfortable with Buddhist practice, went back to Egypt to get married, returned to the USA alone and, finally, returned to Egypt to live with my husband. We had been together there for a year, a wonderful, healing and unforgettable year. I was now in my 30s. I had just arrived in Egypt to really start married life, stressed to the max, feeling that I had arrived with my last breath. I had been separated from my husband for over a year. My job kept me in the US and other worries kept him in Egypt. We stayed in touch all this time, but it was so difficult and stressful that I lost a lot of weight. I was described as looking anorexic. I wasn't aware of this until one day I happened to see myself in the rear view mirror of a cab. I saw my neck, with the bones showing. At first I didn't realize it was me, and when I did, it was a big shock. I looked at myself with new eyes. My hands were bony. I was starting to look like a living skeleton. During this time my husband talked to me, quietly and patiently, explaining not about Islam, but about believing in God. He said that it didn't matter what religion I chose to practice, as long as I believed in God. I argued a lot with him that there was no God, and Buddhism supported this belief. And he repeatedly explained that there is a God and gave me the details of his signs and qualities. He explained how God was with me, through his knowledge, hearing, sight and other attributes, and talked to me about God from the perspective of Islam, emphasizing that I didn't have to be a Muslim, just believe in God. Being a stubborn person, I continued to resist outwardly, but internally a small window of hope began to open. My husband asked a friend to bring me some books on Islam. I was surprised, because I was still not interested in hearing about God, sometimes emphatically. So he left me with the books, an English translation of the Quran and a book on all facets of Islam. My interest was slightly piqued, but I ignored it. I put the books aside and later went to bed. That night, I had a dream. In this dream I was somewhere surrounded by glorious white light. In the background I heard beautiful music that sounded like Quranic recitation. Behind me was a golden spiral staircase. All these images were suspended in this wonderful white light. This light was brighter than anything I had seen in my waking life, but the brightness didn't hurt my eyes. It was pure, heavenly whiteness. Then I looked down and realized that I was all covered in white, in the Islamic way. White dress and scarves, beautiful and graceful. All the while I kept feeling a tremendous joy coming out of me, and I was filled with that same white light. In front of me on the left was a child, 5 or 6 years old, looking straight ahead, so I couldn't see his face. I didn't know if it was a boy or a girl, but I knew it was mine. At the time, I was physically incapable of having children. That dream had a profound impact on me. Although it was 7 years ago, I still remember it vividly in detail. When I woke up, I recounted the dream. Without knowing its meaning, I told my husband about it because it was so vivid in my mind and made no sense to me. I had never had this kind of dream before. When I finished telling him about it, my husband said, "That's the kind of dream every Muslim wants to have." But why me? I didn't believe in God. I denied his existence, passionately at times, and I had no interest in Islam or in becoming a Muslim. He explained that God was telling me something in this dream and that I was very lucky. The interesting thing is that this dream didn't have the quality of a dream, but in fact gave me the feeling of looking at things to come. After this dream, I decided to open books on Islam and find out more about this religion.